Where is your future? I know the question sounds weird, sounds metaphorical, but it's not. And what I want you to do is to point to it, literally, point in the direction of your future. Are you pointing forward? Are you pointing backward? Most English speakers will point forward. We think the future lies ahead of us. The past is behind us. We move through life towards whatever comes next. And this feels completely natural. But some people place the past in front of them and the future behind. Others arrange time from east to west, depending on where they're facing. And some understand time less as a line of identical units than as a sequence of activities, seasons, and relationships. So if human beings can't even agree about where the future is, how universal can time really be? Hi, I'm Tere, doctoral candidate in the Sociology of Time and self-appointed time activist. And in this episode, we are traveling through several radically different ways of understanding the past, the present, and the future. We're going to ask what may be universal about time, what is culturally constructed, and what happens when one society's version of time becomes the timetable everybody else is forced to follow. So stay with me to find out more. All right, so let's start by thinking about the language we use in English. We look forward to a holiday, we leave difficult experiences behind us, a deadline approaches, we face the future. These are all, if you think about it, these are all spatial metaphors. Because time can't be seen or touched directly, we describe it as though it occupies space around our bodies. In English, that space usually forms a horizontal line. The past sits behind us, the present is where we stand, and the future stretches ahead. Interestingly, writing adds another direction. English readers tend to organize sequences from left to right. Readers of languages written from right to left generally show the opposite tendency. Our mental timelines are influenced not only by the body, but also by practices such as reading and writing. But neither arrangement is inevitable. Aymara is a language spoken by communities across parts of Bolivia, Peru, and Chile. Research by cognitive scientists Rafael Núñez and Yves Switzer found a striking pattern in Aymara language and gesture. The known past was represented in front of the speaker, while the unknown future was behind. Why does it happen that way? Because if you think about it, we can see what has already happened. The past is known and available to our gaze. The future cannot yet be seen, so it remains behind us. When older Aymara speakers discuss distant past events, some gestured into the space in front of them. When they refer to the future, their gestures move backwards. The researchers found this pattern in both language and bodily movement, not simply in a poetic or metaphorical expression. Núñez and Switzer's study describes this as a major Aymara model of time, while also noting that languages can contain more than one temporal model, as we generally think. There is something wonderfully logical about it. English speakers march confidently towards the future we can't see, while placing everything we actually know behind our backs. Then we call ourselves future-oriented, which sounds much more impressive than walking forwards without visibility. A related idea appears in a Maori proverb. I'm going to try to read it. Kia wakatumuri te haere wakamua. I'm sorry if I destroyed that. This is commonly rendered as walking backwards into the future with one's eyes fixed upon the past. And this doesn't mean Maori people are uninterested in the future. It conveys the importance of approaching it through ancestral knowledge, through history, and through relationships. Wakapapa, often translated as genealogy, connects people with ancestors, the natural world, and future generation. It's not simply a list of deceased relatives. It orders relationships across the seen and unseen world and provides a way of understanding past, present, and future. Te Ara, the Encyclopedia of New Zealand, describes Wakapapa as fundamental to the organization of time and of the Maori world. The temporal question here changes. Instead of asking only, where am I going? We might also ask, who and what am I also carrying with me? Now imagine that I give you several pictures showing a person at different ages and ask you to arrange them chronologically. If you speak English, you will probably place the youngest person on the left and the oldest person on the right. Researchers gave this kind of task to speakers of Kwik Tayore, an Aboriginal Australian language spoken in Ponpuro on Cape York Peninsula. Again, I hope I haven't butchered that. Cook-Tayore's speakers commonly use cardinal directions, north, south, east, and west, to describe space. Rather than saying that an object is to your left, someone might describe it as being to the east or to the west. In the experiments, participants didn't consistently arrange time from left to right or from the front of the body to the back of the body. They tended to arrange it from east to west. When facing south, earlier events went towards the left. When facing north, they went towards the right. When facing east, time could run towards the body. The temporal line remained anchored to the landscape. That's what's important to remember, while the person moved within it. Alice Gavi's published analysis reports that Cook-Tayore speakers represented temporal sequences according to an east-west axis rather than an egocentric left-right one. And that is more than a charming cultural difference. It reveals a different relationship between person, space, and time. In the English-speaking model, I am the center. The past is behind me. The future is ahead of me. Time is arranged around my body. In this Cook-Tayore example, the landscape provides the stable coordinates. I have to know where I am in the world before I can arrange time within it. Fascinating, isn't it? But we must be very careful here. Obviously, Australia contains hundreds of distinct Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples and more than 250 indigenous languages. One language community cannot stand in for an entire continent. Nor should we reduce Aboriginal understandings of temporality to the English expression dream time, as is commonly done, as though the dreaming was simply an extremely long time ago. Concepts such as Yukurpa encompasses ancestral events, law, country, knowledge, and continuing relationships. They can't be squeezed neatly into the Western division between mythical past and ordinary present. Ancestral events may remain active through place, through ceremony, responsibility, and social life. The larger point here is not that one culture has linear time and another has cyclical time. Not really. All societies experience cycles and irreversible change. We have birthdays and seasons while also believing that history moves forward. People routinely inhabit several forms of time at once. The more revealing difference is what gives time its structure. Is it the clock? Is it the body? Is it the landscape? Is it ancestral relationships, seasonal activity, the completion of a particular task? Research concerning Sámi communities in Northern Europe offers another very interesting example. Anthropologist Nuccio Mazzullo argues that Sámi time should not simply be described as the opposite of Western time. Instead, his research identifies an emphasis on time unfolding through interconnected tasks and environmental conditions, rather than solely through standardized abstract units. His study describes differences in the significance attributed to clock time that are an absolute rejection of it. Time is not merely a container into which life must be forced. It also emerges through what people, animals, and environments are doing. And so this brings us to the clock on your phone. A simple second has an internationally standardized duration. Time zones allow trains, flights, markets, and communications to coordinate across enormous distances. This system is extraordinarily useful today. But usefulness is not the same as neutrality. For much of human history, daily time was closely connected to local events like the sunrise, like tides, prayer, season, hunger, work completed, or animals returning. Industrialization strengthened a different temporal order. Work increasingly had to begin and end at specified hours. Railways also required towns to coordinate their clocks. States, schools, factories, and military organizations divided days into measurable, administrable units. Eventually, this historically particular system came to feel like time itself. Clock time now travels extremely well in our societies. It allows an employer in one country to schedule work in another, a platform to calculate productivity by the second, and a government to impose deadlines upon communities whose lives may be organized through different seasonal, social, or ecological rhythms, like the case of the Sámi in Northern Europe. What travels less easily is the power to decide whose timing matters. Colonial expansion didn't only seize land and impose languages, it also imposed calendars, working weeks, school schedules, bureaucratic deadlines, and narratives of development. Colonized peoples were frequently positioned as belonging to the past, while colonial states claimed ownership of progress and the future. One population became advanced, another was told to catch up. Political domination was disguised as a difference in historical speed. and that logic has not disappeared. We still describe countries as developed or developing. We praise organizations for being ahead of their time. We tell communities that change is inevitable, usually when somebody powerful would prefer them to stop objecting to it. Time becomes a hierarchy. One group doesn't just live differently, it lives late. And this is why asking whether time is universal is ultimately a political question. Humans universally encounter change, duration, aging, memory, and anticipation. Our bodies don't escape succession. Languages everywhere need ways to distinguish what has happened from what has not happened. But the lines, cycles, directions, values, and institutions through which we interpret those experiences are neither uniform nor politically innocent. The clock may measure a minute consistently, but it cannot tell us what that minute means, whom it belongs to, or who has the authority to make someone else wait. So here's this episode's act of temporal resistance. Choose one ordinary expression you use about time. For instance, I'm really behind, or I'm running out of time here, or I'm stuck, I need to move forward. Then question its geography if you want. Behind whom? Running towards what? And who decided that forwards was the only respectable direction? You don't need to replace the clock or begin arranging your appointments according to the migration of reindeer, as in the case of the Sámi population. Simply notice that the timeline in your head is not the universe. It's one cultural map of it. Just remember that. Perhaps the most important lesson I want to share here today is that no culture lives entirely inside one temporal shape. We all move among clocks, we all move among memories, bodily rhythms, seasons, histories, and imagined futures. The danger, though, begins when one of those forms declares itself natural and acquires the power to organize everybody else. And thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it, and I really appreciate you. Please consider subscribing to this channel, liking this episode, and sharing it with your social circles. And tell me in the comments, when you imagine the future, where is it? Where do you place it geographically? I would love to find out more. Thank you so much, and I'll see you when our timelines meet again, hopefully very soon. Bye-bye.
I'm not gonna be polite anymore, 'cause everybody's got bad manners. I'm not